Good afternoon, everyone. We're about a minute from starting our webinar. We'll give everyone a couple of extra minutes here, and we'll get started very soon. Okay, it looks like we're at about 3:01 Eastern here. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our second Ed Leadership Simulations client webinar. Thanks so much for your time today. Today, we're going to be discussing how to use simulations to encourage aspiring school leaders in your districts. My name is Biddulph-Krentar. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for ELS, and we also have Dr. David DeYoung on the call as well. He's the handsome face you see on the screen there. If you haven't met David yet, he's an experienced teacher, coach, principal, superintendent, professor, and higher education administrator. David has more than 15 peer-reviewed publications with a research agenda that includes simulations, school superintendency, and mentoring. And he's elected to the executive board of the International Council of Professors in Educational Leadership. You're going to be on mute today. However, you have the opportunity to raise your hand via the control panel for GoToMeeting if you'd like to say something. In addition, there is a questions feature where you can ask a question by chatting in, and I'll be monitoring that, and we're happy to respond to any questions that you might have. And with that, I will turn this over to David.
All right, thanks, Brian. I'm happy to be here. What my story kind of started 4 years ago when I got into higher education at the University of South Dakota. And I went to a breakout session at a conference. And one of the breakout sessions was one of these simulations from Ed Leadership Sims. It only took me 10 minutes to realize like how powerful they were. And I came away, I'm like, that is the best tool out there for current and aspiring leaders. And I have to tell you, and since that 4 years has gone by, my excitement for the simulations has only grown. And I've been using them all different ways. And I actually have facilitated them hundreds of times to thousands of school leaders all over the place. And I've learned so much about them and how to use them and what works. And I simply want to share some of that with you today. So talk a little bit about the agenda for today. We're going to be talking about how to use simulations to encourage aspiring leaders in your district. And we're going to go through kind of if I was a superintendent or assistant superintendent or leadership director, and I wanted to create an aspiring leadership group or improve one that I already have, this is what I would use. So I set it up this time together to go over that. And as we begin here, and then we'll close at the end and have questions as well. Now, before I get into the principal pipeline, I'm going to launch a poll. And if you would be willing to answer those questions, does your district have an informal or formal principal pipeline? Now, you don't need to call it a principal pipeline, but if you would be willing to answer that question, select either no, Yes, we have an informal pipeline. Yes, we have a formal pipeline, or yes, we have both. So right now the poll is open for you to select one of those responses. Over half of you have voted already, which is awesome. All right. Give you a few more seconds to fill it out. All right, now if you didn't get a fill it out, that's all right, but we wanted to get you thinking and get a kind of a feel of what is out there. So sharing the results. All right, we have no, a fourth of you. Yes, we have a formal pipeline, half of you, and yes, we have both informal. So 75% of this group has some type of aspiring administrator or principal pipeline group, and the other one doesn't, which is great. So I am going to go back and let's talk about this. So one of the things that I want to begin with is I wrote my dissertation on mentoring. And what I realized that it wasn't the amount of time that you spend with somebody, but it was two things. It was the regularity of time and the intensity of time. And one regularity of time is to have monthly meetings. So when I was a teacher first in Pella, Iowa, we had an awesome assistant superintendent, and we had a lot of aspiring leaders at our school. And what they did is they started a monthly meeting, and they kind of tapped some of us and asked us to join this monthly meeting. And they also made it available to other people as well. And we ended up having about 6 or 7 aspiring school leaders, and we met once a month. We met on the first Wednesday of the month for 1 hour before school began. And oh, how I wish that I could go back in a time machine, and if these simulations were already developed, I could give them to our assistant superintendent and lay out his whole curriculum for him. So that is my story, that I'm actually a product of one of these principal pipelines, and it was informal that became formalized because it was working. So one of the things that I want to talk about is the Wallace Foundation. Now, they are doing some incredible research out there, and they have found 3 different things with principal pipelines within districts. First, that they're feasible. So they have found that it's possible for some leader in your school to create an aspiring leadership group. Maybe it is exactly like I just described. Maybe it looks like something else, but it is possible in all districts, no matter what your size is. So even if you have a smaller school and you have 2 aspiring leaders in your building or in your district, start an aspiring leadership group. Now, I think, so I teach in school leadership, and I'm the program coordinator for the superintendent program, where we train a lot of school leaders, and hundreds in our program at a time. And almost always, it's interesting to me that I hear people say, huh, when I was a teacher, a principal thought that I could be a leader, or encouraged me to go get my master's degree, or allowed me to help with some of the duties, and kind of had a distributed leadership model. And I'm guessing that's a lot of our stories in school leadership, is that somebody may have believed in us before we believed in ourselves. And so I just want to encourage you to start one of those in your school. Now, affordable. So what do you do when you have these meetings? Honestly, the best tool out there is these Ed Leadership Sims, and I'm going to spell it out for you the whole rest of our webinar. So these are affordable tools for you to use in your district, and it is a whole lot cheaper than sending people to conferences or farming out the professional development to somebody else or hiring an outside consultant to do your professional development for you. If we really want to build a good principal pipeline in our district, I believe it's important for the current school leaders in our districts to lead those. And this is an affordable way to do that. And then the Wallace Foundation also found that it's effective. So these work. I think one of the fears that some people have is we're going to be creating leaders that leave our district or leave our building. And I think just for the greater good with school leadership, I think it's important for all of us to be able to encourage the aspiring leaders out there, because it works when you create spaces for school leaders to talk, and you're creating a bench of school leaders in your building. So I love principal pipelines, as you can tell. So what I did is I thought to myself, all right, if people are going to come a webinar, busy people out there, what do they want? So I picked out, we have 30 simulations that are available right now. Now, we've probably added 4 or 5 or 6 in the last month. So we always have new simulations in production. And I actually know all of the simulations inside and out. So I went through all of the 30 simulations and I picked the 9 best. And I did that based on the monthly drumbeat of an aspiring leadership group. And I'm going to take you through each of those 9. So if I was leading an aspiring leadership group in September, I would pick the academic goal setting. Now, when I was a principal, what I did is I helped all of my staff members create professional goals that were aligned to their building goals, which were aligned to our district goals, and strategic plan, which was aligned to our mission and vision. So vertical alignment is something that we teach, and I experienced that as a school leader. Now, September 15 was my deadline. I don't know why, but every teacher had to create a professional goal. That is exactly what this simulation is about, and that's why I chose September. So in this simulation, you're a principal, and you have Everett Goodall, who's in the bottom right-hand corner. I look at that dude and he makes me smile because I know how the simulation plays out. And what he does is, well, you ask all your staff member to create professional goals, and the bottom left-hand screenshot that gives you some context. So it's all of our simulations give you maybe 3 to 5 minutes of context, so that way you know who you are and how you're responding from. So in this simulation, Mr. Goodall, if you go to the top right-hand corner, he has 2 goals: to incorporate more technology into social studies lessons, and 2, to find appropriate social studies apps for the iPad. Whenever I read that out loud to a group of school leaders, they always chuckle. And the reason I know that they're chuckling is because they've seen this before. They've seen an experienced teacher that is just giving you professional goals to, because that's one more thing that they have to do, and they're just playing the game. So below that, you see A, B, and C, and that's just an example of how these simulations work. You have between 2 and 5 or 6 preloaded questions, and you need to decide one of those questions before you move on. And many times, based on what you choose, it leads to a different video. So one time I counted out the different permutations, and it was, I think, 24 different videos, little videos or different paths in just the first 4 decision points, which was amazingly cool to me. So in this simulation, you're helping him set his goals, and you go back and forth, and you have to decide, how much am I going to be an instructional leader and take him through this? How much am I going to, send him off to somebody else and have them work with him? Or how much am I going to send him back to his team and have them work on his goals? And then it ends with a great clip where he comes around and he's like, oh, I see what you mean. And everybody's smiling as they're watching it. These simulations are highly engaging. And what's cool about that is we can talk about, okay, did you believe Mr. Goodall that he came around in this simulation? Or did he just giving you what you wanted to hear so he could get out of your hair? And it's a fun simulation. It takes an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, depends on how much discussion you have. And it's a wonderful way to begin an aspiring leadership group. In October, I would choose the dress code simulation. So in this, this simulation takes between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on how deep you go at the discussion points. And you're a principal in this simulation. It's your first year at this school, and you've been an elementary principal for 5 years. So you have a young staff, and what happens is you start hearing complaints about Jen Brown. Now, Jen Brown's in the bottom right-hand corner. You don't get to see her till about halfway through the simulation. But what happens is people are complaining about her dress code and what her attire that she's wearing. And you have to decide, what do I do with her and do I address it? And when I facilitate this in person, what's great is you come to the first decision point and it says, how will you address the concerns raised by Miss Brown's colleagues? A, you decide to take no immediate action and see if Miss Brown begins to dress more appropriately on her own. Bad answer. B, you decide to schedule a meeting focusing on concerns about dress raised by Miss Brown's colleagues. C, you decide to have Terry Feely, the school counselor, and one of Miss Brown's trusted female colleagues have a conversation with Miss Brown about her attire and maintaining a safe and comfortable environment for the students. What's great about this is the participants almost always they say, well, how am I responding to this? Because I'm a man, or I'm a male, or I'm a female, and I get to step back and I get to say, you respond from your perspective, and they all love hearing that, because we talk about in this decision point, does it matter your gender on how you reply to this, on do you get the guidance counselor involved, or do you tackle it on your own? Now, before you're able to even meet with Jen Brown, no matter what you decide, the simulation throws you a wonderful curveball. And all of a sudden, the instructional coach for mathematics gives you a call and is upset about Jen Brown's ability to teach math, and said, I thought this was going to be addressed. And you have to decide then, do you tackle both issues at the same time, or do you separate them? And in the bottom right-hand corner, when you tackle them at the same time, she goes, what? Since I don't dress right, I'm not a good math teacher? I'm so confused. And she says it's snarky. And what happens is everybody in the, because that is what's chosen most often when I facilitated this. And it's because we talk about that. We say, as a principal, you make so many decisions, one decision every 30 seconds in your whole day. And you don't have a lot of time to handle situations. So they want to tackle both of them together all of the time. They're like, let's just get it over with. I'm sick of her already, is what the participants in your room will say. And the simulation teaches you to separate issues and don't address them at the same time, which is a pretty powerful leadership lesson for anybody. Next, in November, I would choose special education. Now, I actually just taught this one this last week in my online asynchronous class. So this, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. It starts with a meeting with Mrs. Clark. She has a son who has diabetes, and she explains that she's talked to Nurse Knox, and Nurse Knox says, yep, we give you a one-on-one aid for a student with diabetes. And then you meet with Nurse Knox, and she explains that's what we've been doing as a district. Well, you don't have the funds to do that, and your nurse has already promised this to Mrs. Clark. So you can see how you're in a real life relevant situation and you end up in a 504 meeting and you are the principal and you are leading this, and you'd have to decide, do not hire one-on-one aid, hire a temporary aid, and you talk about, what do you do with this? And then no matter what you choose, you get a setback where you have an incident that this boy eats a lot of candy and there's an emergency. So this is a good time to share, like, one of the reasons I love these simulations so much is you're giving your aspiring leaders an experience without any real world consequences, which is just fantastic. And these simulations, when you facilitate them, they take care of themselves. You are not the sage on the stage, but instead you're a guide on the side, which is beautiful about these. All right, in December, I would choose new teacher evaluation. This is a great simulation because it's for, you talk about how do you communicate through a formal evaluation process. So in that top left-hand corner, you see that you can get the full lesson notes and you can see Ms. Goodworth's draft evaluation. And the simulation begins, you need to dive into that and you need to read some of that context. And it gives you a great opportunity to talk about what's expected in your district in regards to formative and summative assessments that you do with teachers. So right after the meeting with Ms. Goodworth, you get an email from her and she just tells you about what she loved about the meeting. She can't wait to hear from you. And she's very nervous. And you have to decide, what do you send to her and what do you say to her? And I found that there's a gap in our ed leadership programs in regards to this. Like, do you send them a full evaluation first and let them process it on their own? Or do you set up the post-observation meeting before you actually observe them so they know what to expect? There's a lot of unknowns with new teachers, and that's a great way to calibrate all of your aspiring principals. And if you had aspiring principals, they'd probably score pretty well on this one because they're looking at it from what do I want as a fairly young teacher or a fairly new teacher as well. So it goes into, in the top right-hand corner, you can kind of see that orange ball. And this one measures her stress level. And when I facilitate this in person, it's crazy that half of my participants want to raise her stress level to get her to change. And the other half are like, oh no, I'm going to work with her each step of the way through this process. And it's fascinating for them to talk to each other and go back and forth about why they would choose what they would choose. So as a facilitator, you can sit back and you can let them process this on their own and get them off to the best start possible when they do evaluate someone. So that's what I would choose in December. In January, the girls basketball coach. So my younger brother is a boys basketball coach right now, and he's playing in sub-state on Saturday night. So, or his team is playing. And I'm highly invested in their team. So I get this perspective from a coach as well. So you have 3 pictures in the top left-hand corner of your screen. The simulation begins with Ms. Harper Lee coming to a school board member or school board meeting and complaining about a girls basketball coach. What makes it worse is you find out that at one time she sent an email to you as the high school principal. You forwarded it to the athletic director. The athletic director called her, but there was a lost communication and the problem just went away, which complicates it. And it's a great discussion point. After that, you have a media reporter that calls you that night wanting to know about your perspective because she's doing a story by the end of the day. And then the superintendent calls you right away in the morning and says, call me right away. You probably saw what happened at the board meeting. Let's talk this through. Now, when I was at my first meeting 4 years ago, I was in a room with people, and I was like, there was 30 people in the room, and I was one of two that would call the superintendent back first. So to show you what I mean, you come to this decision point, you'd A, first return superintendent's call, do not respond to the reporter at this time. B, first call the parent who spoke at the board meeting, Ms. Harper Lee. C, do not make any phone calls yet, first investigate the complaint. Or D, first return the reporter's call. They all chuckle with that. If you have enough time, it's fun to choose that one and show them how that plays out. But I was one of two in this room that chose A, and I was a recovering superintendent, going into higher ed. And I couldn't believe that the people in the room would not call the superintendent back. It floored me, because I know as a superintendent, I may have more information than the principal has. I also know as a superintendent that if I say, give me a call back, that's what I mean. My words matter. And as I listened to people's responses, and they would say C, because if they called their superintendent back without having more information, they said they knew their superintendent would be more angry with them, or more angry or frustrated, or think they didn't know something. And it really helped me see other people's perspectives, and really made me think that it matters who the superintendent is and your relationship with the superintendent. It's such a great conversation for aspiring leaders. I loved it. So towards the end of this simulation, you have a choice. It's C. Well, this is after you discipline the coach for swearing. Well, there are some confidentiality rules, but I think it is probably okay if I tell you that we did discipline the coach, and if anything like this happens again, we will definitely be taking further action. Nobody chooses that point, but it's so close to the end of the simulation. I always say, hey, let's learn from a bad choice right now. It makes everybody in the room cringe. They're smiling, they're engaged. And what happens is the HR office calls you and the school attorney gets involved, and you break confidentiality, and it's a mess. And what you do though is you give somebody an experience without any real world consequences. And then we talk about our words matter, and that's why I would choose this simulation. February, my all-time favorite sim, the disruptive teacher. So you have a teacher that comes into your office. It's Kim. She's pictured in the top left. And she says that there's a kind of a teacher that's not so nice to everybody else. And you get to choose how to respond to her. Do you want her to dump the bucket and keep telling you what's happening? Or do you take her side? Or, what do you say in a situation like that? And people love digging into that. Now, the interesting thing about this simulation is 2/3 of the time that I facilitate this, and I've facilitated this one 75 times, a ridiculous amount. The participants, the majority of the participants choose to send Kim back to the quote bully teacher, and she immediately resigns. Her resignation is in the top right-hand corner here. And they are just, we talk about that little snap decision that you make as a leader could cause one of your best teachers to resign. Well, the simulation goes on to the collaborative team meeting in the bottom right-hand corner, and Diana just goes off the deep end. She crosses all these red lines, and you can talk about how to manage disruptive people. It's a wonderful simulation to talk about how to treat people and how to manage really difficult people. So when I ask the participants, how many of you have worked with Diana? 95% of the people raise their hand immediately, and they love talking about those experiences. So I just sit back as the facilitator and let them process that with somebody next to them. It's a great way to spend an hour with aspiring leaders. In March, I would choose cultural competency. So in this simulation, you have a teacher, Mr. Henton, he's in the bottom right-hand corner, But it first starts, so you get a visit from Mr. Turner and a meeting with Mrs. Baldwin. And they give you specific incidences where Mr. Hinton, even though he's a beloved teacher, he is not being culturally responsive. He's sending kids out for disciplinary issues for not having a pencil, and then he defends it. So, I mean, you come to a pretty important decision in it. So, like, here's another example. There are 5 choices. 1, appease Mr. Turner by noting you will take immediate action. Bad answer. B, or 2, tell him you will investigate and get back to him. 3, ask the parent if he's spoken to Mr. Hinton. 4, delegate to your assistant principal, Griffin. Or 5, pull Mr. Hinton into the meeting right now. And that sets off the room. Just talk about what they would do and why. And eventually you meet with Mr. Hinton. He digs his heels in, and then he also comes around at the way end. And when I have people say, do you think he's being genuine in his response to you? 95% of people say that he's not. Like, they love how talking about that. And it's just a fun simulation and very effective for getting the point across. In April, I would talk about cyberbullying. This one has a bunch of little mini cyberbullying scenarios that you go through, and they're real. They're what our principals are dealing with right now. One is student-to-student cyberbullying, and one is an anonymous student to a coach. And if any of you have led that or been in a district nearby that has had somebody anonymous write a post about a coach, it can be extremely distracting. And I like that. And this one has a fantastic feedback loop at the end. So you review your scores, and it takes you through each of the decision that you made all the way through the simulation. And it gives you feedback specific to your choices that the group chose. And it's fun to talk about that as well, the feedback loops at the end. And then in May, I would choose the end of the school year. This is great for new principals, and it's especially good to get them to open their eyes about how hectic the end of the school year can be. I mean, it begins here. This is the epilogue at the end. What a pressure cooker these last 3 months have been. And you have all these situations being fired at you, boom, 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 from all these people and all these little pictures to the right. Everything from, you know, a preschool graduation ceremony to choosing a new math curriculum to teacher requests for which student is in which teacher's class for the next year, to scheduling, to promotion of teachers. And it really gives, it prepares aspiring leaders to know how the end of the school year goes. You know, if I was leading this, I would say, don't leave your teacher evaluations to the end, because you need to have those done long before the end of the school year, because this is what your end of your school year will be like. Which I think is pretty powerful. So that's what I would do if I was creating from scratch an aspiring leadership program within my district. So one of the next things that I want to do is I want to open up the next poll right here. So if you'd be willing to answer this question, what kinds of support do you provide for teacher leaders? I don't want to leave them out of this conversation either. Opportunities for professional development outside the district, opportunities for professional development. Ooh, the first one should be inside the district. The second one should be outside the district. The third is stipends to help with managerial duties. And the fourth one is unpaid opportunities to help with managerial duties. So if you'd be willing to vote on this about what you do for school leaders that are teachers at the moment, maybe called teacher leaders. Oh, it's great. All right. So I'll tell you what the results are at the moment. They're all for the first two choices. So opportunities for professional development inside and outside of the district. So if you have this for teacher leaders, I would highly recommend, even if they say, I never want to become a principal, or I never want to become a curriculum director, or I never want to become an instructional coach. These simulations are just dynamite for them and exactly what they need. So yeah, consider using them. Again, they take between 30 minutes to an hour. And I found that it's pretty easy for me to, fit that in. And I'm also not afraid, if the group is very chatty and wants to talk about their decisions, to take longer than an hour per simulation. So just sharing the results here. Okay, now, as we finish here, it sounds like about 3/4 of us have an aspiring leadership group in your district, and 25% may see a need, hopefully after today. And I'm going to invite Brian to help close us up and see if there are any questions. And even if you don't ask questions right now, feel free to email us or call us, or let us know how you're using these in your district. We're happy to support you. And I would love to learn what you're doing as well. So thank you.
Yeah, that's great, David. Thank you so much. Great job. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the question area, or if you'd like to raise your hand and make a comment, that's no problem either. If not, we'll be sending this out for you to reuse or share with your colleagues in the next day or so. But I want to thank everyone for their time, and David, thank you so much again, and I'll hang on if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.